much, Mr President, and it gives me great pleasure to rise tonight to participate on the adjournment debate. This fortnight, government senators have worked very hard to demonstrate to the public the codependent relationship between the ALP opposition and the union movement. We have hoped to highlight the abuse of the rule of law, of decent behaviour, of agreed tenets of safety in the workplace, free from bullying and harassment, and sought the support of the opposition to fight this ill, particularly in my home state of Victoria. But instead, there has been silence, and often there has been defence, running a protection racket, indeed, for this sort of behaviour. In the other place, the extent of this relationship was played out in a debate which should have centred on providing boarding provisions for Indigenous students, $7 million in additional funding for specific schools to provide this service for some of the most disadvantaged students in our community. Instead, we actually had a lesson in ALP union codependency. The debate centred around ensuring Indigenous students in remote locations receive support to overcome the extra challenges they face when they head to boarding school. Many of the schools supportive of these students have come to the government pleading for these extra funds, and the need for more money was confirmed by the findings of an independent review. It's hard to imagine why there'd be any opposition to this notion, and indeed the opposition in the other place passed measures on Monday the 20th of October. On the 2nd of October, the Shadow Minister for Education, Ms Kate Ellis, promised the House of Representatives, "We will not hold up this legislation because we know it is important that funding goes to Indigenous boarding schools as well as independent special schools." Ms Ellis was right then. It is so important. As recently on Monday the 20th of October, the Shadow Minister for Health, Ms Catherine King, pledged that, and I quote, "Labor will not stand in the way of measures that will ensure that funding will flow to independent special schools next year. This is an important guarantee to make for those schools." Ms King was right then. It is an important guarantee. Assistant Minister for Education, Shadow Minister Ms Amanda Rishworth, was even more enthusiastic, saying, "It sounds too good to be true, but believe it or not, such a program was underway and becoming a reality under the previous Labor government." The Shadow Minister Rishworth was not quite right. The program was not becoming a reality under Labor, and indeed that would have been too good to be true. One of the purposes of the measures, according to the independently written explanatory memorandum, is to address a number of errors and omissions that occurred during the original preparation of the Act, which undermined the intended operation of the Act and create funding and regulatory uncertainty for schools. This is another example of sloppy work by the previous Labor government. They rushed through legislation without really knowing what they were doing, and once again the government is required to clean up Labor's mess. After all this glowing praise for the measures in the other place from Labor, we could expect bipartisan support as it moved forward, but Labor has done a backflip. What happened? Perhaps it was cuts to funding from schools. No. There was actually considerably more money for education in the measures, $6.8 million to be provided in 2014 for Indigenous boarding schools initiatives, as identified in the 2014-15 budget, and an additional $2.5 million will be paid to certain independent special schools and special assistance schools in 2015. What could possibly prompt Labor to be against $7 million for Indigenous boarding schools and $2.4 million for special schools? The real question is not what would make Labor say no, but who could make Labor say no. I found the answer in the Bundaberg News Mail of the 21st of October 2014, the day after Labor in the House of Representatives passed the measures. And I quote, "Union slams changes to Gonski reforms," the headline screamed. The newspaper story was based on a media release by the Australian Education Union Deputy Federal President, Ms Karina Haythorpe, headlined, "Pine makes another attack on Gonski." It was pretty shrill stuff. It's hard to imagine our brilliant but diminutive Education Minister assaulting the more substantial bulk of David Gonski. It is up to Labor to explain why the AEU doesn't like the bill. One suspects it has something to do with the fact that the schools which it funds, the schools where Indigenous students are board, are non-government schools and therefore are not under the total control of the AEU. The Bundaberg News Mail is an excellent local paper according to the local MP for Hinkler, my friend and party colleague, Mr Keith Pitt. The journalist did his job, exercised due diligence and sought comment from the Labor Party. They got a hold of Ms Catherine King, and perhaps because she's the only Labor frontbencher representing an electorate in regional Australia. This is the same Ms King, you'll remember, who promised Parliament one day earlier that Labor will not stand in the way of the measures within this bill. This is an important guarantee to make for those schools. Yet, Ms King did a Cirque du Soleil backflip after hearing that the union bosses weren't happy. All of a sudden, the changes which she'd voted yes to less than 24 hours ago now, and I quote, risk the crucial 2 years of Gonski funding in 2015-16, as well as putting in doubt extra loadings for students with disabilities, among others. Of course, that's not actually true, but truth has never got in the way of a union boss pulling the strings of a parliamentary Labor puppet. It reminded me of Senate budget estimates last week, when the Education and Employment Committee was hearing from the Fair Work Building Construction Director, Nigel Hadgkiss. Mr Hadgkiss was providing evidence under oath about CFMEU members brutalising, harassing and abusing him and his staff. Female public servants visiting building sites were being abused on loudhailers with insults so sexist and extreme that I cannot repeat them in this place. The CFMEU even had Mr Hadgkiss's wife under video surveillance as she returned from her mother's funeral. As chair of the Education and Employment Committee, I was keen to hear what Labor, represented by Senator Cameron, would have to say about this appalling behaviour against women, and indeed public servants, any worker. After all, Labor has spent much of the last 4 years fabricating a narrative of misogyny in coalition ranks. Surely Labor would be revolted by the misogynistic behaviour of the CFMEU and its officials. It turns out they were more interested in pleasing paymasters than condemning this abusive behaviour. The whole line of questioning by Labor was about accusing the Fair Work Building Commissioner of breaching the privacy rights of a convicted CFMEU organiser who lied about his criminal past, including recklessly causing injury, criminal damage, theft and going equipped to steal in order to gain a right of entry permit. So whether it's the AEU or the CFMEU or any other union, we know that it is the union that calls the shots for the Labor Party in 2014. What happened to the reforming, economic growth-orientated Labor Party of yesteryear that gave us the great income contingent loan scheme, which has underpinned access for a wide variety of Australians to our higher education system? All of this would be funny if it actually didn't seriously impact on the lives of the most disadvantaged Australians, Indigenous children from remote Aboriginal communities and children with special needs. So much of the government's current legislative agenda needs to be passed in this spring's sitting so that we can provide additional funding not only for Indigenous boarding students in 2014, but to other key areas of government and public spending and public service around education and research, to give certainty to our educative system and to give certainty to independent, special and special assistance schools that their funding will not be cut in 2015. If we don't pass it, they actually won't be able to have that money delivered. For once in their lives, Labor senators should put the interests of the poorest Australians ahead of their fat cat union bosses. Set yourselves free.
Thank you, Senator McKenzie.